By the winter of 1932, Ford Bradshaw understood something the old outlaws never had to learn. The world was already watching. Not just sheriffs and deputies, not just posses forming slow and angry at the edges of town, but newspapers, telephones, wire services, federal bulletins. Faces were described before they were named. Crimes traveled faster than horses ever could. A man could rob a bank at noon and be half famous by sundown, his name guessed at, misprinted, or pinned on someone else entirely. He had been born in Oklahoma, raised in the spaces between towns where work came and went, and the land didn't promise much more than endurance. By the time the Depression settled in for real, banks folding, farms failing, men lining up for jobs that weren't there, Ford Bradshaw was already convinced of something simple and dangerous. Money still moved. It just moved through fewer hands. In early 1933, Bradshaw began testing that assumption, not with grand schemes or big crews, but with precision, small-town banks, quiet places where routines were more habit than security. Ocmulgee, Henrietta, towns where the tellers knew the customers by name, where the same men sat in the same chairs at the same hour every morning, places that believed themselves too small to matter. Bradshaw walked in calm. Witnesses said that later, too. That he didn't rush, didn't shout unless he had to. He knew the power of stillness. A man who looks unafraid gives everyone else permission to panic instead. Money changed hands, doors closed behind him, engines started. By the time anyone had decided what they'd seen, he was already gone. Some accounts blamed Charles "Pretty Boy" Floyd. That wasn't laziness, it was pattern recognition gone wrong. Floyd had already become a symbol. Depression outlaw, working-class bandit, folk hero to some, nightmare to banks everywhere. When a robbery fit the shape, reporters reached for the name that already existed. There was safety in being misnamed. Let another man wear the legend. Let another face absorb the heat. But Bradshaw wasn't content to stay invisible. He wasn't trying to be a ghost. He wanted control, not cover. And control, once tasted, has a way of asking for proof. The details there were messier, louder, harder to romanticize. Something went wrong. Whether it was nerves, resistance, or simply impatience is hard to say. Shots were fired. Businesses were damaged. A jail took rounds meant less for escape than for statement. This wasn't theft anymore. It was defiance made audible. Glass shattered, brick chipped. Townspeople hit the dirt and learned how thin walls really were. That was the moment Bradshaw crossed an invisible line. Not legally, he'd crossed that long before, but culturally. Bank robbery could still be framed as desperation, even rebellion. Shooting up a town could not. Whatever sympathy the Depression allowed snapped shut. Law enforcement response hardened. Descriptions sharpened. Names stopped drifting and began to stick. Bradshaw kept moving, but the space was gone now. The frontier that once let men disappear had been paved over with roads, radios, and coordinated warrants. This wasn't the Old West, where a man could ride 50 miles and be reborn. This was a country learning how to catalog its criminals. Accounts differ on the exact sequence. Who fired first, where Bradshaw stood, how many chances he was given. What doesn't differ is the ending. He resisted arrest, he didn't surrender, he didn't run far enough. Gunfire ended the story the way gunfire had sustained it. The newspapers reported his death briskly, efficiently, without the breathless awe once reserved for Jesse James or the Daltons. There were no ballads, no dime novels, just columns of facts, wire copy moving on to the next name, the next man who thought he could outpace the system. He stands at the hinge between eras, after the horses, before the highways fully took over. He wasn't a frontier outlaw, and wasn't yet a modern gangster with an organization behind him. He worked alone or nearly so, armed with instinct rather than syndicate. His legend wasn't built by mythmakers but by clerks, deputies, and editors trying to keep up. He slipped through it briefly, left fingerprints where boots used to be, and was recorded accurately, relentlessly, until there was nowhere left to go. The Old West ended when men stopped being able to choose their own endings, when stories no longer belonged to the survivors, when the law stopped chasing slowly and started writing things down. By the time he understood it fully, his name was already in print, and the margins for escape had closed.